Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to break down the college football games from Thursday night. If you are just joining us now and you missed out on the Colorado breakdown, definitely go back and check that one out. But again, we spent enough time on that game in particular. I want to go a little bit wider range here, and I want to start with North Carolina versus Minnesota. And what we talked about this yesterday, two Power 5 teams that are going through different shifts in terms of a rebuild of sorts. North Carolina down their starting quarterback, of course, Drake May being drafted to the NFL. Then Minnesota as well. They end up having their quarterback from last season. I believe, if I have this right, it was Ethan Kaliak-Manis who ended up transferring as well. They decide to make the move, and they end up coming in with a new quarterback in Max Brosmer, the transfer from UNH, and it seemed like Brosmer was going to be able to put together the drive that Minnesota needed to close out this game in the fourth quarter. Made a couple really nice throws that got them down the field, few rushes to get them a little bit closer into field goal range, but ultimately they missed the field goal with time expiring, and North Carolina holds on, which was a big win for UNC, but a big loss for them was what took place in the third quarter as their starting quarterback, Max Johnson, had to be carted off the field with a hip injury. It seemed like it was a little bit more lower leg when the play took place at first. Looked pretty gruesome and definitely still, hopes and prayers out to him, but looked like a pretty rough injury. Ultimately, they do classify it as a hip injury, and it's still TBD on whether or not he will be able to make a return for them. But again, not really sure how that's all going to play out with them. Ultimately, again, status up in the air. Now, this is a good running team in UNC, and ultimately they were able to bring in a quarterback at least that plays into that same identity where once he goes down, Connor Harrell takes over for them. And, the passing game really wasn't part of their strategy down the stretch there. Harrell, I believe he is a sophomore, so you have some youth experience there. Has only thrown, I think going into last night, it was 6 career pass attempts. Or it looks like 23. He had 33 pass attempts. So my apologies there, but either way, with Harrell, not very much. No, it does, I don't know, ESPN can be so fluky sometimes. What I'm seeing is 6 pass attempts in 2023, and that was it. But I think that ultimately here, they didn't want to overwhelm him, have him come in out of the gates and potentially put too much pressure on him, so he added a nice little factor in the run game of sorts, ended up rushing for a touchdown, made a pretty big throw in the fourth quarter as well, where it looked like he was going to take off, but a little RPO opened up a man down the field, so Harrell was able to convert there. That helped set up a big field goal for UNC, but this is ultimately could be a very big loss, and it's not like Max Johnson was lighting it up in this game in particular anyways. He was 12 of 19, 71 yards, 1 interception, but you hate to see an injury like this take place, and, again, thoughts and prayers out for him. We will keep you provided with updates moving forward, but already this was a UNC team that was probably going to have to rely a lot on the run game, and that is definitely the case now, especially if Max Johnson is out, where Omarion Hampton, one of the best running backs in the country, he was getting his workload for sure last night, where ultimately 30 carries, 129 rush yards, 4.3 yards per carry. He is going to be the bell cow for this UNC team that, again, is running into not an identity crisis per se, but this seems like, for the first time, I think they mentioned on the broadcast since 2018 that they are starting a quarterback not named Sam Howell or Drake May. So definitely a different look UNC team, and they're going to have success on the ground to be able to ultimately compete in the ACC. But even if it is just escaping with a win here, a win is a win. Going to Minnesota and pulling it out. Again, scoreboard-wise, that's all you can ask for. We'll have to see how things play out from here, though, with Max Johnson. And by the way, it was Max Johnson who ran for the touchdown, not Harrell. My apologies there. But we saw a ranked team come out to a slow start here, where number 24 NC State ultimately kind of had to battle in order to pull out this game against Western Carolina. A little bit of a surprise in large part, having this game at home and feeling like they were sort of ramping up. This is an NC State team that has been building up a very solid program these past few years. They have Grayson McCall as a transfer quarterback out of Coastal Carolina that should continue to play well for them. Ultimately in this game, the stats pretty good for him. 26 of 40, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Interception came on a little bit of a miscommunication there. I believe it was with KC Concepcion, who we're going to be diving into here in a minute. But, McCall, I thought it looked a little bit shaky for him early on. This was a game that It took him a little bit of time to work into it. Even when he was completing passes, the precision was something that was not quite up to the standard that we saw when he was at Coastal Carolina. But ultimately, I think that that's more of a positive, where I can't imagine that just disappeared on him. Maybe it was the nerves of playing for a Power 5 school. Who knows? But ultimately, he settled into the game and helped to take over in the second half. So even when things were struggling for NC State, ultimately they were still leading just about the entire way. And a couple mistakes, the interception, some getting stopped on 4th and shorts hurt them, but they end up pulling away pretty convincingly. And like I mentioned, KC Concepcion going to be, one of the top wide receivers in college football this season. He was special once again in this game. 9 catches, 121 yards, 3 touchdowns. They love to just get the ball in his hands. You could see with them those little jet sweep passes. I don't know the exact terminology for them. Just get him out in space and see what he can do. He can create, and he definitely was special in this game. And it will be very interesting to see that growing connection between him and McCall moving forward for NC State. And ultimately as well, just kind of a random note as well, was the fact that this game started just about as poorly as it could have. Almost great and then poor, where each of Western Carolina's first 2 passes were almost intercepted. It was Caden Fordham on the first one, just sort of slipped through his hands. Aiden White on the standout cornerback for NC State, couldn't bring it down in a tip drill. But then just a few plays later, Caden Fordham gets in encroachment and then gets ejected with targeting. So again, not the start that NC State was hoping for out of the gates, but now that they're settled into the season a little bit, hopefully they can clean some of those things up. But next up, we have Howard versus Rutgers. We'll be pretty quick here on this game. Rutgers is just a team that I am sort of intrigued in from afar. And ultimately, this was a good game for the first half, where I believe Rutgers led, I can double check here, but it was just 17-7 at halftime. It took the offensive line, I thought, a little bit of time to fully settle in, especially in the run game in particular. But once they got going, the doors were just wide open for running back Kyle Monangai. He, I believe, led the Big Ten in rush yards last season and did a very good job of reinserting himself into, the eyes of the public. 19 carries, 165 yards, and 1 touchdown. He was special in this game. And ultimately, could have gone more if it weren't for the fact that Rutgers was starting to pull away with this game. But ultimately, a very impressive performance from him. I also want to give a little bit of a shout out here to DJ Jabome, who is expected to take on a bigger role with this Rutgers defense. He was flying all over the place, 14 tackles, 5 solo tackles in this game. Just maybe maybe a player to keep an eye on. But sort of rounding out the results from last night, just some scores from some of the bigger games. Again, wasn't an incredible slate. It was Thursday night. It's week 1. Typically, we see a lot of blowouts here. We did see 3 other ranked teams play. Number 11, Missouri versus Murray State. They win 51-0. And in that game, Luther Burden, one of the top wide receivers in the NFL, expected to probably be a top, or in college football, probably expected to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft next year. He sort of reintroduced himself to the country as well, scoring the first touchdown of the season for the Tigers. He didn't get a ton of chances overall, so it's not like it was this unbelievable stat line, but was a really nice play for him to score there, where he makes the corner miss, and he was sort of high-stepping his way into the end zone. Again, just to remind everyone the type of talent that he is. And then additionally, Toriano Pride Jr., big transfer for Missouri, coming from Clemson. He made an impact on this game, scoring a pick 6 in the first quarter to help out that Missouri defense. We know the firepower on offense with Luther Burden and Brady Cook, but Pride could be somebody who makes a real impact on this Missouri defense moving forward. Number 12, Utah, they end up beating up on Southern Utah 49-0. I didn't get a chance to watch this game, but I mentioned my interest in Cam Rising this season. 10 of 15, 254 yards and 5 touchdowns. So pretty impressive stuff there. And then name to sort of take out of that as well, as I go back into second watch here, but Dijon Stanley, the sophomore running back, 9 touches, 184 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Majority of his damage coming in the passing game, but will be interesting to see as well, once Utah sort of needs to start winning in the trenches more, what impact he could possibly have there. And then finally, number 22, Kansas versus Linderwood. They win 48-3. Running back Devin Neal with a nice season debut, another one of those top running backs in the country. He only played in the first half, still 8 carries, 112 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, very quick as well, because I didn't get to watch most of this game as well. But Jalen Daniels, fine stat line, maybe slightly underwhelming. 9 of 15, 148 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But it was really just that 1 interception that makes it look worse than it is. Came on a miscommunication between him and wide receiver Luke Grimm. Grimm ended up turning out a very good game. So, ultimately, you take that one play out of it, and I do think that ultimately Jalen Daniels had a fine game. Lance Leipold credited him and said that Daniels played very well. So ultimately, again, an interception. You don't love seeing that on the stat line, but some of those miscommunication interceptions more than anything, like we talked about earlier, it was during the NC State game. Sometimes those types of plays can just happen, and that happened between McCall and Concepcion. It happens with Kansas between Jalen Daniels and Luke Grimm. It sort of is what it is. But we have some other scores here for our video viewers here. Tulane winning 52-0 versus Northwestern State. Arkansas 70-0 against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Illinois beating up on Eastern Illinois 45-0. Wake Forest versus North Carolina A&T 45-13. UCF versus New Hampshire 57-3. So again, just some other scores out there that were at least notable in terms of being some of these Power 5 teams. But again, let me know what your takeaways were from last night's action, where so many games to sort of keep track of all of it, that I know I have some of my blind spots. If there's anything that you think you saw that is notable, we would love to hear it in the comments section. But we are now going to be shifting gears a little bit to the NFL, where in the past 48 hours we've got a number of different stories regarding some contract negotiations between players and coaches with their respective organizations, and the biggest, of course, being that Brandon Ayuk and the San Francisco 49ers have finally agreed to a contract extension. Finally, we are done with this offseason drama about what is Ayuk's future looking like. He gets locked up for a lucrative new deal, so we'll break down the details of that contract and the impact it could have on both the 49ers and the league. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere, and we will be right back.